Welcome to City Space, and thank you for coming out in this awful weather. Okay, that's what we default say in Boston, obviously. Enjoy the lovely Sunday as soon as we release you into it. And if you like your experience here today, then please share us, as the kids say, share us on social. That's at WBUR City Space. And also sign up for our events newsletter. You do that by going to wbur.org/newsletters. And you'll find out all the other cool stuff that's scheduled here. And today also we are going to be taking your questions via smartphone and our interactive polling app, which is called Slido. There is nothing to download, but and if you don't have a smartphone, I'm sorry, but cozy up to your neighbor who probably does. That's our little brand of fellowship. There's nothing to download, as I said, but get out your phones only now for this purpose. If you go to Slido, that's S as in Sam, Slido, SLIDO.com in your web browser.
It's right behind you.
Oh, ha. Great. And then you just enter where it says to enter the code, you enter the HC915, and then you can actually just start asking questions as they occur to you. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A, and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can. It's supposed to just work. Amy tells me it works.
Slider.com on your cell phone, and it should come up, and then you just type in HC915.
And if it doesn't work,
Hang out afterwards.
yeah, we'll figure something out if it doesn't work. Okay, so that's the business stuff. And so again, welcome. And because you are here today, I have this kind of sneaking suspicion that you might be a little bit like I am, which is that perhaps you are a little bit over-invested in what came before. And just between us, among us, I don't really understand people who don't have that curiosity. It's, the curiosity about the past and the future of places and the people that came before. I always want to know who was there, why, what did they do, what were they up to, and what are we doing with those spaces now? And I'm also kind of a relentless daydreamer, so of course I'm making up little stories about who came before and answering my own questions about them. And I am usually doing that at times. I should be doing something productive. So again, I don't think I'm alone in that. Anyway, so learning more of the details of this stretch of Com Ave where I work and where I've been wandering around for a little bit of time has been fascinating. And I obviously didn't really do most of the research. The research came from Ken Liss, and he's put in the work. Local history research is his game, and he came to play, so let's get going. Ken, let's talk a little bit about the origin story of how you came to learn more about the history of Automobile Row.
Well, we can start by bringing up the slides. There we go. So I actually first learned about this way back in 1985, before I came to Brookline, before I was a librarian at Boston University, when I bought a book called Main Street to Miracle Mile by Chester Liebs that's about roadside architecture, and it has a whole section on automobile showrooms and a 2-page spread on Automobile Row. Others have also done work. BU has done work by Patrick Kennedy and Robin Berghaus. Bill Marchione of the Brighton-Allston Historical Society did a lot of work on Automobile Row. But my kind of current interest in it came about when I got an email from the Brookline Planning Department, they were going to post this photo to mark the opening of BUR City Space, and this shows the building. It's the building underneath the Studebaker sign. It's not the building that the Studebaker sign is on, but the one that says Boston Used Trucks, and that's this building. And they were going to post it to social media to mark the opening of this space, and wanted to know what the date was. And Studebaker was there for some time, so it was a little hard to date it. But when I zoomed in, I saw these signs for the Clean Right Auto Laundry at the back. And I found ads for Clean Right from 1930 to 1932. So I'm guessing that's when that picture is from, although somebody who knows autos better than I do might be able to tell us something a little bit different. So as a librarian at BU, in my full-time job, I teach students how to do research. And one of the things that I get them to think about is that questions lead to research like this, but research leads to questions. And so I dated this picture, but I wanted to know a lot more. And that kind of got me started on this project. This building was built in 1920. And we don't have maps for every year, but we have one for 1919 that shows that there was nothing here. And in fact, looking at a map, one map earlier than this was all one estate. St. Paul Street didn't come all the way through to Comm Avenue. Dummer Street wasn't there. This was all part of an estate, and that's 1919, a year before this building was built. And then in 1927, you can see how it's really filled in with this building and several others that were part of Automobile Row.
So, Ken, where we are sitting right now, we are sitting in an auto dealership.
We are, and if you came by this building in the early 1920s and looked in the big windows, initially you'd see a brand of automobile called the Winton 6 or six-cylinder car, and there's lots of different brands, ones that I'd never heard of before. And Winton was here. The Globe noted its opening. MIT magazine had this fanciful picture complete with a peacock and a Winton car. And they were here initially, but within a few years, other companies were sharing this space. There was the Marmon Motor Company, the Brown Motor Company selling a car called the Gray Car, which seems a little odd. And Columbia, three types of cars that no longer exist, and we're all in this space. And we've actually heard from, Sharon got an email, and we've had some exchanges with someone who heard the piece on WBUR last Sunday and said, I think my grandfather was the owner of this dealership. And I did some research, and sure enough, he was. So. But it changed over the years. So other companies came in. It was Braves Field Motor Car Company, because Braves Field was just a little down the street and across the street. There were DeSoto sold here. And then in the 1940s, it was taken over as a wholesale place for B.F. Goodrich, a tire company. So there are a lot of auto dealerships here. There were also affiliated car-related companies that were loaded here.
And then, Ken, let's see. I am famous for having no sense of direction. Just that way, there was another auto dealer?
There was. And this one, unlike the dealership that here, was selling used cars. So while there were new cars of all kinds of brands, there were a lot of used cars that were sold. In this case, it was the Fellsway Motor Mart with this kind of Gothic exterior. That was there for quite a number of years. This too changed the companies that were in there. Metropolitan Motor Car selling used cars, Spot Cash for cars. It was a tire company later in the 60s. Peter Fuller, and we'll hear more about the Fuller family in a little while, was selling Porsches here when kind of foreign cars started being sold along this stretch of Commonwealth Avenue. And these are 2 pages from the 20s and the 30s from the Globe and the Herald of auto ads, and everything that's marked in that teal color is along Commonwealth Avenue. So there were a lot of dealerships. At one point in the 30s, there were 117, by one count, auto-related businesses along Commonwealth Avenue.
Okay, so let's, we started right where we are sitting, but let's circle back a little bit. I mean, how did this whole phenomenon begin in Boston? Let's go back to the start.
Well, a lot of people credit the growth of Auto Row and Com Ave to a man named Alvin T. Fuller. And he's the second from the left here, pictured here with Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Harvey Firestone of the Firestone Tire Company. And he was probably best known as a politician. He became governor of Massachusetts and was the governor during the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, who declined granting them clemency. But he made his name first in business, first starting out in his hometown of Malden and in Park Square selling bicycles. And very soon after started adding automobiles, picked up the Packard brand. There's a picture of him from a newspaper showing him touring around in another brand of car called the Northern car. And so he had this dealership in Park Square. And then in 1906, he moved into a new building that was built, it was called the Motor Mart in Park Square. And prior to that, a lot of the dealerships, the auto dealerships here in Boston and around the country, were using existing spaces, storefronts that were used for other things. But this was built specifically for automobile dealers, and it was shared by many auto dealers. Were all in this space together, including Alvin T. Fuller with his Packard dealership. So that was in 1906, but very quickly he was very successful, and he was looking for more space and a different kind of dealership where he wasn't sharing space. So in 1909, an article appeared in the Globe about a new garage opening in a place known as Packards Corner, and there was a stable owned by a man named Packard near there, and it's a little unclear. I've heard that it was actually called Packards Corner before the Packard dealership was there, after the stable. I'm recently not entirely certain that was the case, but that the stable was there. But
and excuse me, but we are going to have to dig into this controversy, because I've been bandying about this fun fact that it was called Packards Corner preceding the arrival of the Packard motor car company.
And it still may prove to be the case, but so far the earliest reference to the term Packards Corner was 1941. So there may be some. I know that research is never over. It's like a jigsaw puzzle with no end pieces. So we may find more information. But in 1909. Alvin T. Fuller announced he was going to build this building at the corner of Commonwealth Avenue and Brighton Avenue, and it was designed by an architect who worked a lot for Henry Ford, built the Rouge River plant later in Dearborn, Michigan. And his name was Albert Kahn. He was a German Jewish immigrant who built at one point in the 1930s, it was said that about 1/5 of all industrial buildings in the United States were designed by him. And he later designed over 500 factories in the Soviet Union. So he was a very prolific designer and an interesting man. And he designed this building. It was featured in the Packard magazine in 1910, and it had a park that was 350 by 190 feet with elm trees, oak trees, maple trees, and iron fence. Cars would drive through the park to get to the back where the entrance was for the automobiles, and it was really different from anything that had been done before for auto dealerships, and it was a full-service distributorship and dealership. So it wasn't a factory; they weren't building the cars here, but they had there's the park, and they had a beautiful showroom with 28-foot high ceilings. Mahogany chairs and tables. There was a telephone exchange and bathrooms to the right. Fuller's office and others were to the left. The mezzanine had general offices and accounting offices. But the building was just it did everything. And I'm very curious about this one that says a shop that looks over the Harvard Stadium, the Charles River, and the blue outlines of the Berkshires. I'm not sure. You could actually see the Berkshires from here, but
it's not like car dealers have ever been known to exaggerate.
Right. But But this employed 256 skilled mechanics in this building. There was a stock room with parts for every Packard and Cadillac. Fuller added Cadillac as a reliable and lower-priced alternative, so to Packards. And they had equipment and parts for every model that had ever been built of Packard and Cadillac. And while they didn't build cars here, they said they had so many parts that they could actually put together a whole car. There were body shops, there was a blacksmith, there was woodwork, there was a fabric shop, there was a machine shop, everything that was needed, car washing, so when somebody's car was here, it came out clean. They would even, in some of these luxury cars, they would change the bodies in the winter and the summer, and they would bring them in here to have the bodies changed. The top floor where the work was done, the repair work was done, could work on 75 cars at a time. There were 2 large dining rooms for the staff, interestingly, separate ones for the office workers and the mechanics, and lockers for the workers. And it was so successful that after a time, Fuller expanded it, and he built a second wing that matched the first one, where he sold used cars and trucks. And they were joined at the back, but the courtyard still remained. And that was in 1916. So that was only 6 years after the building opened. So he was doing very, very well. And there's a picture of a salesman with one of the cars parked there.
What was the idea? Can you sort of elaborate a little bit on the idea behind having this be so elegant? I mean, this, certainly is not what we think of auto showrooms now, but this was sort of an innovation.
It was, and I think as in 1910, cars were no longer quite a novelty, and people weren't just coming to buy cars. They needed some salesmanship, and the sales experience was an experience, and they wanted people to feel comfortable while they were waiting, to feel that they were getting. I'm sure they were selling the quality they saw in the showroom was meant to reflect the quality that they hoped people would think they were getting with their cars as well. A few years later, another addition was put on the front of the building, and that building still exists in Packards Corner. It's now apartments. It's known as the atrium, but this is an aerial view. You can see the courtyard with the pool, and that central section in the front is the newest addition. So that enclosed the courtyard, and that's what it was like. That's what the building looks like today. Eventually, this became a Clark and White Lincoln Mercury showroom, and this is from, I think, the 50s or the 60s, looking west towards the Packard building. And it has some remnants. So, we talk in the title about ghosts and shadows. So there's the Packard name, little symbol up at the top of the building are still there today. The main entrance to the apartment building has some lamps hanging from the ceiling that are apparently original to the 1920s edition, that central edition, but that was not where the original entrance to the building was.
And so that's the, Packards Corner, which we can all hear the trolley drivers announce if we're unfortunate enough to occasionally be on the beeline going through there. But let's sort of establish our perimeter here, because Auto Row, that's sort of one end of the old Auto Row. The other end is around Kenmore. Around Kenmore,
and really started around the same time. So magazine called Motor Truck, and some of these trade magazines are wonderful. One of our favorites is one called Horseless Age. And I just recently discovered that although it's changed its name a couple of times, it still exists today. So it's still produced. I can't remember what the name is, but this was showing the Peerless Auto Company, another auto line that you may not have heard of. And they built a building in what's now Kenmore Square. A couple of others followed. This is in 1930. You may recognize these buildings with the Peerless sign, an auto car, and I forget what the Hudson cars. And again, these were kind of full-service buildings. They were showrooms, they were repair rooms, they were service, all kinds of things. That's what this looks like today. That first building is the one that has the Citgo sign on it. And the 2 buildings just to the west of it have recently been torn down. But I believe these buildings are going to be preserved. I'm not certain what the plans are for this.
And the idea here was that everybody started to understand after Fuller kind of got the ball rolling. People understood that if you moved out to Comm Ave, you would have space, you could create the exact environment that you wanted, because back then this was sort of a nothing doing land compared to the heart of Boston. I mean, there.
Right, and also there was more room, and also this was a place where there was a lot of traffic. So people would come by and they'd see these big windows and they'd see the cars. So it was a place to where the cars could be seen. That the customers maybe looking for a new car would be driving by here, much more so than some of the older places that the autos were. And they started coming more and more. So there were, this was a building that was built for Rambler somewhere in the 1910s. Later became a Nash dealership. So Rambler at the top, Nash at the bottom, and an aerial view on the top right. That's the building today. It's the College of Communication. It had a kind of international style facade put on it in the 1950s. But if you turn the aerial view around, look from the back, you can see the back of the building still looks like what it looked like when it was first built. So that's one of the remnants of Auto Row. Next door to that, in December 1910, a new building was announced, a great Back Bay land deal with more auto showrooms. And those buildings are still there. They're hidden now. That kind of area in the front of the building in the sketch in the newspaper is now Warren Towers, big dormitories at BU. And the building just behind it is the front of the buildings that we see in the newspaper. And the building at the back is still there, and it's on what's now Cummington Way, used for BU classrooms and departmental offices. Cummington Way, at the end of Cummington Way, just the west end of it, there's a brick building that has a very interesting history. And this building, which was originally 17 to 19 Lawton Street, has a little plaque on it. And this plaque refers to that this building was a stable and garage for this plaque was put up in the 70s, and they used the term Afro-American. But a black businessman, a prominent black businessman named Henry Turner, who had his garage here from 1900 to about 1909. And you can see reflected in the window is that building that was pictured in the newspaper, looking down Cummington Way. And he was an interesting man. He had a stable elsewhere in Boston. He opened this in 1900. Here's a picture of him, a bill for his boarding stable and garage that mentions horse clipping by electric power, and selling horses for sale. And in some ways, this was a predecessor to Automobile Row. So he left in 1909, so the same year that Fuller announced he was going to build this new building. And the building was actually then taken over as a wholesale Buick headquarters. So this was even before the Packard building was built. Buick moved into this building with a man named Harry Noyes, Noyes, who had a Buick dealership in Lowell, and he became the dealer in this building starting in 1909.
And okay, so you mentioned Harry Noyes, and I have learned from you that Harry Noyes was not a bit player at all.
He started out just doing the wholesale business for Buick, and he became the leading distributor of Buicks in New England. And in 1920, he built a new building for his dealership, which is now the College of Fine Arts across the street, just near the BU Bridge. And this was the building, and like the Packard building, it was kind of a full service building. It was designed by a Brookline architect named Arthur Bowditch. Some Brookline people may know the name. He designed the Stone Home on Beacon Street. He designed Pelham Hall at the corner of Beacon and Pleasant Street. He designed the stores at the corner of Harvard and Beacon across from the SS Pierce building, and he designed this building as well. And Noyes became very successful. This great postcard showing X marks the spot, showing the building with all the many services that he provided, as well as a service building at the back, which is basically just across the street behind the building over here. The building in the front here was not an auto showroom. I'll talk about that in a little while. And Buicks were sold there into the 1940s, and auto business was there into the 50s, and BU acquired this building in the 1960s. And it was a beautiful building. It had, these are some pictures showing what the showroom looked like. The picture on the left shows with the entrance coming in from Com Ave on the left side, and the picture on the right is the reverse. So the Com Ave entrance is on the right side. And the stairway leading upstairs was said at the time in a trade magazine to be the most artistic in Boston, with the possible exception of the Boston Public Library. There were restrooms furnished with the latest fiction and technical magazines. One for the office workers and one for the mechanics. I'm not sure if that's the restrooms are one for each, or the fiction and the magazines. Upstairs, like the Packard building, was service, where they would work on cars, body work, machine work, all kinds of things that took place in this building. And again, used as an auto showroom. The large windows have been covered up, but that building is now having some work done on it, and it's going to be opened up again. And that space is one that's used for. There's an art gallery in what was the showroom and the College of Fine Arts.
Right, and that's one of the buildings, even though it is under construction, if you're diligent, you can still wander around in there. And that has some pretty cool ghosts and shadows that's extant.
It really does, and you know, I'm finding new ghosts and shadows all the time. One day on my way walking home from work, I was stopping in every building, walking in and out, and I thought somebody would say, "What are you doing?" It's research. But one of the ghosts and shadows is the street across the street from it is Buick Street. So it runs down to what was the service building. But
you can sort of see in the background of the picture where the scaffolding is. That is the, I mean, it doesn't stand out as much now because it's under construction.
But inside, where these Corinthian columns, and the columns are rather unusual because unlike flowers or maybe gargoyles that you'd see at the top of a column like this, they're figures of auto mechanics. There's a man with a wrench, another with a steering wheel, one holding a tire, and the guy on the right, I guess he's just holding up the world. I guess we can call him Road Atlas. So. I could not do a presentation without a pun, so. The building directly across the street from us, out that window, is one, you can see it marked by the arrow in the picture in the top left. That was not an automobile building. It was actually a building of a publishing company known as the Perry Mason Company. And it published a children's magazine called The Youth's Companion. And inside the lobby of that building, the newel post for the stairwell has the letters YC for Youth's Companion. So it's not exactly a ghost of Auto Row, but it's a ghost of a prior use of this building. And by the name Perry Mason got a laugh, it's actually connected to the Perry Mason that everybody knows, because apparently Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote the Perry Mason stories that later became a radio series and a TV series with Raymond Burr, he was a reader of this magazine as a child, and he named the character after the publishing company that published the magazine.
So, yeah, if anybody asks, the gargoyles in the CFA building are my favorite. So we've kind of covered some of the, I guess you could call them kind of the anchor tenants of Auto Row. What are some of the other things that are interesting along here?
And we have one more sort of anchor that we'll come back to, but a lot was in between. And while we can't go into all of the buildings here, we want to show some of the things. So here's a building at 949 Commonwealth Avenue, just a little bit west of here, and that was Commonwealth Chevrolet. Commonwealth Chevrolet actually was in several different buildings, and it was actually it just seems to pop up in many of the buildings that I'm researching. So there it is with its original facade, a little bit of what it looked like inside, and what looks like at the corner right now. Although the building behind it is still a very large building that had not just where the showroom was in the front, but a lot of the services that took place in that building. A little further down at 1065 near Packards Corner was this building, which was also Commonwealth Chevrolet later on. A beautiful Art Deco look to it. Here's a look what that one looked like inside. Commonwealth Chevrolet kind of covered up the stained glass window in the center, but I kind of love the look of it at this stage as well when it was Commonwealth Chevrolet, and today it's the Star Market.
And if you look in the middle of that picture, because that window, that stained glass window on the Chevrolet dealer, I mean, that's still there. It's pretty amazing. I had walked by that stretch, I don't know how many times, and never actually noticed that particular window. Carry on.
Well, there was an addition to this building with the same design, and it's now part of the Star Market. And there were a series of posts. There are several of them, and they have this little marker in it with it looks like a tire with an arrow going through it. And I actually took this picture and didn't really pay much attention to what I was taking a picture of until I looked at it later, and I said, I know what that is. Famous car known as the Pierce Arrow. So that building, which we saw as Commonwealth Chevrolet, was originally built for Pierce Arrow. And this was their logo. And there are many variations of it, different designs with an arrow going through a tire, but those are still along Commonwealth Avenue by the Star Market, where the Pierce Arrow Company was. Back at Packards Corner across the street, these are some buildings that were not auto showrooms, but have an interesting role to play in the history of Auto Row. The place that in the top I think that's from the 80s, 1094 New England Petroleum Equipment is now the Win Lash Bar. I don't know if that's Win or Wino. I can't really tell. Wino Lash Bar sounds like an interesting concept. But back in 1916, this was a sales place for a motor vehicle that was a little different from the automobiles. It was called the Autoped. Now,
yes, we had scooters on the Brookline line.
Back in 1916, and that space was where they were sold from. And there were articles. I love these things about using it for businesses. There's health in it, there's wealth in it, there's pleasure in every minute. Don't fly up in the air, it's dangerous. Fly near the ground. And this was reported on all over the country. It wasn't just Boston that had them. The new Autoped, even a Puck magazine with that fanciful picture of a woman riding on a gas-powered Autoped.
And if you don't live in Brookline, and if you don't follow the Brookline Townwide Discussion Facebook page, allow me to just bring you up to speed on this. There are no topics other than scooters in 2019. So I thought that this was a intriguing development to have learned about, especially given that Com Ave currently is such a prime example of multimodal transportation. I mean, and arguments about same. Just finally, after about 100 years of construction, the bike lanes, the protected bike lanes are getting finished. We've got the trolleys, we've got the 57 bus on the MBTA, we've got the BU shuttle buses. We obviously have cars and pedestrians. We either fortunately or perhaps unfortunately also do have scooters on the Brookline side. So, fascinating to me that it all kind of started here in, what year was that, 1916?
1916, yep.
Okay. So there was, I know when we were talking about Alvin Fuller before, who became governor but was an auto mogul, there's more to that story, right?
Yeah, he even after he was in politics, even after he was governor, he still had his auto dealership. And remember that he had introduced Cadillacs as a lower priced alternative. He dropped them very quickly in 1911, so just a year after the Packard building opened. But he came back to them, and in 1928, the Boston Globe announced that the Cadillac Company was building a new Cadillac building in Brookline, a model in efficiency and economy. And this is the building that's now known as the Fuller Building at 808 Commonwealth Avenue, just opposite the BU Bridge, formerly the Cottage Farm Bridge. And this was a building that was built for the illustration that says Cadillac and LaSalle, but it actually became Cadillac and Oldsmobile. So just like he had introduced Cadillacs as a lower priced alternative to Packards, he was selling Oldsmobiles as a lower price alternative to Cadillacs. And that building continued to be a showroom for a very long time, and it was very similar to the Packard building in many ways, to the Noyes Buick building, in that it was really a full-service building with a showroom, parts and service departments, business offices, advertising department, customer waiting rooms, and a large parking lot nearby as well. It had a clock on the corner, and it became a real landmark. And in some ways, as BU developed the area between the bridge and Kenmore, it kind of became sort of the anchor to the other end of Packards Corner. And it had a 25-foot wide ramp that covered all 5 floors, so cars could go up and down in both directions without having to let them pass each other. Eventually, it was taken over by Alvin Fuller's son, Peter Fuller, who ran it for many years, and you can see the advertisement for their 63rd year in 1967. Some of the details on the building, beautiful signage, beautiful to me anyway. I love old signs and find them really interesting. And the building even today has remnants of what it was in the past. So there's a picture of the entrance, Cadillac Automobile Company of Boston, and you can see the entrance today, and you can actually see where the letters were. The letters are gone, but the imprint of them is still on the building today. At the top of the building are some tire motifs that might have thought were flowers, but they actually look like tires, and those are up on the top. And that 25-foot ramp that winds through the building is still there today. The building has a lot of art studios in it, and so there's a lot of kind of detritus of student art projects on the ramp, as well as some graffiti. But it's still there, including some signs, dangerous to walk on ramp. We survived. Stop on red light. Those are all original to when this was an auto building. There's even an old car in there. Although this car, as best as we know, it's an old Ford. This was never a Ford dealership. My understanding is this was actually used in a theater production, but it is actually an old Ford. And you can see the Ford name on the running board. There are some pieces like those little electric switches with sticky notes on them that I think were probably not original. But it's a beautiful old vehicle that's just sitting there up on the top floor of the building.
And if I may interject at this juncture, if I ever question what career I'm in, this is the kind of thing that makes me know I'm doing the right thing, that I can wander around on a beautiful day and go up a deserted ramp and take pictures of an old, ancient Ford and have it all be part of my job. So,
and some other details of the building, Sharon, I think I lost one of my nice slides, but maybe it'll come up later. So, I think I moved it. So, again, some of the details inside the building. This building is now undergoing some construction, and the most of the first floor, which has been an art gallery for a number of years, is going to be the new home of the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground at Boston University. Howard Thurman was a mentor to Martin Luther King when Dr. King was a student at the theology school at BU. and the Howard Thurman Center does a lot of great work, and they're in kind of cramped spaces in the basement of the Student Union, and they're building a beautiful new space that's going to be in here. That's what the entrance is going to look like, and they're incorporating some of the features and. You can see this is a sketch of what it's going to look like, and you can see the pattern on the ceiling there. This is what that pattern actually looks like. So these are some features of the architecture of this building, also designed by Albert Kahn, the same architect who designed the Packard building for Fuller. And the windows are going to be opened up and beautiful view both inside and outside. And we really like this picture because it just shows some of that multimodal transportation. There's a bicycle going by, there's a train, there's the cars. At one point, when Sharon was taking pictures, a helicopter flew over, but we couldn't quite get it into the picture.
So we've sort of been concentrating on the glamour part of the dealerships, these sort of luxurious auto showrooms. But there were other parts of Auto Row that weren't necessarily about the showrooms and the dealerships, but they were still very integral to this industry, and with some beautiful ornamentation as well.
There were. Well, certainly there were gas stations, there were tire stores, and there were still a few of those around. But there was also across the street from the Fuller Bridge, the Fuller Building, and to the east of the bridge was a Shell oil gas station. This was actually the regional headquarters for Shell Oil, and this is taken from the roof of the Fuller Building, and you can see the neon Shell sign lit up on the lower left. That it was seen from miles away in both directions. And that stood there at that corner. Next to it, between that building and the bridge, where there's a parking lot now, was something that's not directly related to the auto business, but certainly was dependent on the auto business, which was a Howard Johnson's restaurant. And so that was there right by the BU Bridge. And the Howard Johnson's is gone. The Shell headquarters is gone, but that building is now a Boston University Academy, a private high school. And you can see on the right that the building had some kind of a nautical motif and a frieze around it, including the shell for the Shell sign, and that's still on that building today. The neon sign was eventually taken down, and one half of it, because it looked in both directions, was moved across the river to Cambridge, where it stands at a Shell station on Memorial Drive that's seen on the lower left.
And one of the things that's kind of amazing in a way is that these buildings are still here. I mean, so many of these buildings still exist, given that this is the city that demolished the West End, for instance. So the fact that we still have so many of these structures and that they've been repurposed seems like a small miracle, or a big miracle in a way.
Yes, and it certainly wasn't always clear that would happen. I think we've seen this in lots of places where buildings have been torn down. Sometimes ones that happened just at the wrong time when the preservation movement and the technology to reuse buildings had not come around yet. Certainly in Brookline, the old 1873 Victorian Town Hall, torn down in the 1960s. Maybe if 10 years later, they would have found a way to reuse it. But a lot of these buildings really did survive. They started to lose some of their luster. So here's some pictures of the Fuller Building in the 70s. When it just looked a little shabbier. Even the signage looked a little bit shabbier. So they were still selling cars there, but it wasn't quite as nice as it had been. And over time, a lot of the auto businesses started to move away. Much of this was with the move of population to the suburbs. A lot of the auto dealerships moved out to the suburbs. There's now Auto Mile in Norwood, and some of these buildings, like here's the the Fuller Building in 1981, selling beds and furniture. So they went through some hard times. And some of the changes kind of kind of showed what was happening. So here's 930 Commonwealth Avenue, a little bit to the west of here. The building on the right is 930. The optical shop, I think the BU Health Center is in there, but it was a Rambler. It was a Rambler showroom, and you can see it down below. But they also took over space across the street and kind of like what was happening in the suburbs, the move was away from these big indoor showrooms with big windows to big parking lots where the cars would be on display and people would do that. And you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that here. There just wasn't the land. So a lot of the auto dealers started to move out to the suburbs like Route 1 in Norwood and open new spaces. And the buildings that were here suffered. So there's 930 again on the right and today. But here's what it looked like in the 1980s. So it was a shambles, and it didn't get torn down, but it was not doing very well. Here's 916 Commonwealth Avenue in 1981. It's Honda of Boston selling motorcycles, also Vespas. So they weren't selling cars, but you can see just looking at the building, the building's not in great shape. It wasn't maintained very well, and that's kind of what was happening. But we're lucky that many of these weren't torn down. And here is in 1981. This is the building just to the east of us. You can see on the right that beautiful facade, and on the left, the not so beautiful facade. That it was luckily it was covered over but not torn down. If you don't remember what this looked like before, that's the building. So it looks a little bit better on the top than it does on the bottom. But that's what it had come to in 1981. Remember, I said that somewhere in the 1930s there were 117 auto-related businesses along Commonwealth Avenue in this stretch. In 1981 there were 11. So it really was suffering. And this building that we're in now, that's what this looked like in 1981. So the windows were covered over. It was plastered with billboards and posters. Shortly after this, it was taken over by a company that did some renovations, and it was a house of an auction house was here for a number of years. But the buildings survived. BU started buying up more of the buildings. WBUR actually moved here into this building in 1995.
Just to be clear, when it looked like that, WBUR was not here.
Right.
We were over in the Nash Rambler building that's BU's College of Communications. That's where WBUR was back then.
Right. And before BUR turned this into city space, it was Landry's Bicycles, so another transportation business. And Landry's is down the street further west on Com Ave in another old auto row building. So it's kind of nice the way these things have kind of all come together. And BU when BUR moved here in '95, the articles in the Globe said they were moving off the BU campus. So I'm a little unclear when BU actually owned this building. Some records say 2005, some say earlier, but certainly BU, as it's grown and has had more needs, has put a lot of these buildings into different uses. And just most recently, the former BU bookstore in Kenmore Square moved into one of the old auto buildings that's hardly recognizable, but it's just down the street from here. And today we have this building and the building next door restored, expanded. There's more room in the back, and it's a busy area with a lot of transportation going by and a lot of different kinds of uses of these spaces that are taking place in what once was Automobile Row.
Yeah, and bringing y'all here for community conversation right here, and. Ken and I have been talking about this so that I could produce a radio feature on Auto Row that aired last week, and so we could discuss this here with y'all today. And it's certainly gotten me reflecting about sort of what it all means. But you're the researcher, you're the expert, and I'm curious really what some of the conclusions that you reach about this are.
Well, as I said at the beginning, questions lead to research, and research leads to questions. And there are so many questions, so many threads that I could pursue, but that others could pursue as well. And some of them, we've kind of touched on here, like the story of Henry Turner, who had that stable and garage and left in 1909. I'm very interested in his story. His son got a medical degree from BU. One of his daughters went to BU, and they donated some papers, including the photograph and some of the other material from him. But I'm very curious as to why did he leave and Buick take over? Was he just not able to keep up with the changing times? He started as a stable owner. Could he not keep up with the automobile business? Was his race a factor? He had mostly white clientele. Was he forced out? I don't know. I don't know that I can find the answer, but that's an example of the kind of thread. Certainly the question of the Packard riding school and the Packard stable. I found some fascinating stuff about it just yesterday. Research never ends, and that's another thread. But I'm particularly, as someone who works with students and faculty in different disciplines, I'm very interested in how this can be a topic for study. And I go into a number of classes, and just this past week, I worked with 2 different classes, and I used this as an example of how to do research. One was an urban planning class. And one was a first-year writing class on the topic of the culture of college. And I used this as an example for both, by the way, in former auto row buildings. And some of the questions I have are, as a research topic for both of those, is what's the role of an urban university with its neighborhood? With BU, you hear a lot about housing. So there are a lot of things about the housing stock, about students living in neighborhoods, and the issues that the neighbors have with students and student housing. But there's also this infrastructure, this historic infrastructure, if you will, of these buildings that were built for a different purpose and are being reused for academic buildings and also for retail space. And what is the role of a university? And BU is not unique as a university that's located in the city. It's rather unusual in being this very horizontal campus that's very long and narrow, and in a space that was a long and narrow space used for something else. And what does the university do with these spaces? When does it tear things down? When does it renovate spaces? Does it preserve these remnants that are here? I know that they're not going to destroy those gargoyles. They could use some work. Maybe they'll do some repair work on them. But it's a topic of interest beyond the history, to understand what can be done. And as I say, this work is never ending. I have ambitions. We'll see if I realize them, to create a website with stories about all of these buildings. If anybody has really good website building experience and wants to volunteer, I'd love to hear from you. I have a fair amount. I've worked with the web for a long time, but I could use some help. So, but I think there's that's one of the key lessons, again, of research, is that you never know when you start on a topic where it's going to lead you. That's what I try to teach students. Start exploring a topic. It will lead you in paths you may not have thought you'd want to go. I tell students that I describe my own method of research as directed stumbling, and that I'm interested in a topic and I just start poking around and don't worry about where it's going to end up. But the directed part means that I start to see patterns, I start to see themes, I start to see things that I'll follow, and I try and get students to think that way as well. I did a poster session at a library conference a few years ago with a project I worked on with a faculty member who's sitting in the audience here, and the title of the poster was "Telling Students to Get Lost." But that's what research can lead you to. So you start out with a question that somebody asks that you don't know the answer to, and it leads you in directions that you find, and that process of exploring is something that I really enjoy. And I'd say the only thing I enjoy more than that is sharing it with other people, as I'm doing here today.
And I have to say that Ken and others like him, but especially Ken does this amazing research. And not all the rest of us are necessarily going to do the research, but we all have the powers of observation. So I am sort of known for wandering around, lugging my camera around with me. And one of my favorite things to do is just notice things. And one of my favorite hashtags on Instagram, where I like to show my photos, is look up, find more, because you can just always appreciate what's there. And working on this, for me, and I think for any of us, can lead us to a new appreciation of not just of the built environment, but of those little details that just kind of make life as rich as it is. So that's part of what I appreciate about learning all this.
And that's very true. I certainly find this in Brookline and other places that you walk by things that all the time that you never notice, and just walk around and look at things. And I'm doing. Last night I was at a birthday party. I was telling somebody about this talk and about the auto mechanic gargoyles, and they said, I've been in that building a million times. I've never noticed them. So history is in plain sight, or as I like to say, the past is present, and sometimes we just need to be curious and look around and wonder about things and ask questions. Ask them of yourself. Ask them of someone else like me, and you never know where it's going to go.
Speaking of questions, nice segue. I think that we have arrived at the portion of our program that is all about questions. And I am inept at this technology here, but actually, Anonymous wants to know where you found all the photos. So I'm assuming that's not the contemporary ones, but those great historical photos.
Oh, a whole bunch of places. So remember, my work on this project started with Meredith Mooney of the Brookline Planning Department, who sent me that one photo that showed this building. And so I then went over to the Planning Department and went through their files and got a lot of photos from them. There are others from the Boston City Archives, from Historic New England, formerly known as the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities. I always used to mess that up and say the Society for the Prevention of New England Antiquities. So I'm glad they changed the name to Historic New England, so I can't make that mistake anymore. There were photographs from the archives at BU, from the BU Photography, part of marketing and communication at Boston University. There was some, MIT had some photos. The Brighton Allston Historical Society had a lot of photos. So there are a lot of different places. And then there are some that are from old trade magazines and newspapers, sometimes sketches. One of the delights of old newspapers sometimes is, yes, the photographs are really nice, but sometimes they had sketch artists who made these beautiful sketches, and those are really great. But there are some photographs in those. That Packard magazine had that beautiful interior view of the Packard building. And some of those magazines have been digitized by Google, so you can find them on Google. Sometimes it's a matter of really digging to find those things, and but there are lots out there, and it's curation. It's finding many that are dead ends or that you're not going to use. But there are lots more photos that I found that didn't include in this.
This maybe tops on people's head. The question, not mentioned as one of the most visible auto-related businesses in the area, the Citgo sign. So when did that sign enter the story? That was the 60s?
That's a good question. It was originally a city services sign. So there was another sign that was there before. And I'm afraid I don't know the exact date that the Citgo sign itself went up. I do know that they are planning to keep it. I was trying to find out some more details. I know that they took down the buildings to the west of it, and they're going to build something else. And one of the thoughts was, if those buildings go higher, they will raise the Citgo sign, so it'll still be visible. But I don't know the date.
And people often question why we are so enamored of a fossil fuel neon sign, or, sign. But it kind of makes me think of this whole topic, which is place is about a lot more than just the superficial meaning of something, and the impact of how we feel about places is not always directly connected to the direct function.
Right, and there's certainly a lot of nostalgia. I mean, you see that in any time things change, and I believe in preservation. I also believe that we live in a city, not in a museum, and you can't always keep everything. I think when we can keep things, when we can reuse them, we should when we find a way.
And then, so you can go to this slide, perhaps. The slide showing Comm Ave from the Fuller Building shows a peek of the old Ford factory across the river.
Yes.
Do you know if that location had anything to do with Auto Row or how that ties in?
I don't think it did directly, but certainly the other side of the river was had a number of auto related. But that unlike Auto Row itself, none of these buildings on Commonwealth Avenue were factories. They didn't build cars there. But that building across the river was a factory where they actually built Fords. I think the river, and probably more so the railroad, was a factor. I recently came across something just recently in terms of this, was the last couple of days, something that when the Buick building was built, initially they couldn't get a place to offload things from the railroad directly to the building, even though it's right there. But certainly the railroad was an important piece of it. And on the other side, where the Mass Pike is now, was railroad tracks as well. So the buildings on Cummington Way and which many of which had a Commonwealth Avenue address, kind of backed up on the railroad there too. So that was also a part of it.
And do you happen to know when the Cadillac dealer closed at, wait, is that 880?
808.
808, yeah. 808 Comm
Ave? I believe it was in the 70s. Whoops. Okay, I don't know how to get back to the...
Okay. Do you know much about the sort of integration of like BU and Auto Row? I mean, the question is, how did it happen that BU developed across the street from Automobile Row? But that sense of, as you say, it's a kind of an unusual combination.
Well, it is. BU started in more downtown Boston. BU was actually going to move to Brookline, and there's a street in Brookline just off of Washington Square called University Road. That's named for Boston University because BU in the 1870s bought much of the land on what's known as Aspinwall Hill with plans to move its campus there. And in the Great Fire of Boston in the 1870s, BU lost a lot of properties that had been given to it. They were not used for the school, but they were investment properties, and they were destroyed. And in order to, from what I've heard, in order to raise money, they sold off the BU property and eventually consolidated because they had, as the school grew, different schools were in different locations, and they looked to this area as a relatively undeveloped area, especially to the east of here, as a space for a new campus. And they kind of grew from there. And certainly as the automobile businesses started to kind of move away from here and out to the suburbs, more of that property became available. And certainly across the street where the armory was, the armory was torn down, and the FitRec, the Fitness and Recreation Center for BU, was built. But it's continuing to change. We're seeing things like the BU bookstore being here, like this space being built here, and I expect we'll continue to see change.
And that's interesting because I don't remember this. I remember what is that, Daewoo dealership in the late 90s at the corner of Comm Ave and St. Paul, where the CVS is now.
Yeah, there were a number of. I think that kind of gave a little bit of extra life to Automobile Row was the growth of kind of foreign dealerships. In fact, there was an ad that I had in the slideshow, but took it out, from Peter Fuller introducing his Audi dealership, and I can't remember the exact wording. It was like, here's a car you've never heard of, or something like that. So I think the kind of the imports of cars from Japan and Korea and from Europe kind of gave some new life for a time to the area. It certainly wasn't the last one, because there are still Herb Chambers, not quite, just past Packard Corners. Packards Corner. There's Herb Chambers Toyota on Brighton Avenue, because the auto row kind of continued on Brighton Avenue. And then there was Herb Chambers Audi around the corner on Com Ave, and there was Herb Chambers Honda, which was recently torn down. And I don't know if I'm guessing they're not building another auto building there. So there are still some. Oh, they are. Okay, I'm wrong. So more expensive things, yeah. So there are still some remnants of Automobile Row, including dealerships. There were a whole bunch of signs. The building kind of catty corner from the Citgo sign, where the Pizzeria Uno, I guess it's called Uno now, not Pizzeria Uno anymore, which was a hotel, had a white oil sign on the top that actually moved, so there was like oil that would kind of, in lights, would drip down, and the Ellis the Rim Man sign, which was a little to the west of here. So there were quite a few of them, and you know.
Did you come across any nighttime photos of the neon? Like, do we have a sense of what it looked like at night?
I have seen some. I didn't include them in there, but there are a few. There are a few. I can do a whole separate talk on neon signs.
Right. Well, as you've pointed out, back in the day, signs, I mean, there weren't the kind of zoning and regulations about signs. It was like the bigger the better everywhere.
Right. And even, you know, that those pictures of the building next door to here, where they covered up that beautiful kind of Gothic exterior with just a kind of a black front. I think there's a little more sensitivity and perhaps regulation on what kind of signs can be put up now today as well.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you so much for coming out. Get out there and look at details, folks. And thanks to Ken Liss. And Ken will also, if anybody really just didn't want to tap on your phone to ask a question, Ken's available for further questions in the lobby. So you can swarm around him and ask him all your other questions, as we all do whenever we see him, if we know him. Thanks a lot for coming out, y'all.